thank you very much to the University of Oklahoma, and thank you very much to Professor Charles Kenny for the invitation. No? So we agreed that I would have a presentation of half an hour, 40 minutes. I will be glad to send you my PowerPoint presentation with some informations that might be of interest for some of you assisting. No, I will try to share my screen. Okay, again, I will send you the PowerPoint when I finish today. No, so the topic of today is this new triangular relationship between the U.S., China, and Mexico in 2025 from a 2025 perspective. And I would like to share some reflections on issues and topics that we have been working for 20 plus years since the late 1990s. No? The topics I want to share with you are some references, a little bit of the work of Socioeconomic and Red ALC China that Charles was already highlighting, a group of concepts that I believe are important to understand what is going on in the 21st century and what we can expect in the next years, and finally some discussions. If I have time, I will elaborate on the investment relationship between China and Mexico if I have time. If I don't, I will not. No? I remind you why have I been working on issues regarding China in the last almost 25 years. I am not a sinologist. Note the irony. I always say a good sinologist starts 1000 before Christ, and if you don't make it to 1000 after Christ, that's okay. No, we start in 2025, and if I don't make it to 1000 after Christ, that's okay with me too. No? So we started in the late 1990s working at UNAM, but also at ECLAC, or CEPAL, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. We started doing empirical work on trade, investments, firm-level analysis, and there was increasingly a country called China, which was important in trade, in specific global value chains, in yarn garments, among others, auto parts, electronics. And well, the question was, well, who knows a little bit about China in Latin America and in its relationship with Central America and Mexico? Surprise, very few people. No? So this is why we began developing these institutions, Socioeconomic and Red ALC China, beyond the fashion today. No? When we started, people asked, why do you want to study China? No, I mean, why don't you study Belize, which is much closer to Mexico? Do you have a psychological problem to analyze China, which is the country probably furthest away from Mexico? Today, people ask, why didn't you start working on China much earlier? No? Today, Red ALC China has 700 members, no, from all over the world, and we are very proud to have a very heterogeneous group of members. From historians to architects to economists, political scientists, but also businessmen and women, among many others, members that are part of the communist parties in Cuba, in Venezuela, in China, but also of the armed forces in the United States. No? This you cannot have today, neither in the US nor in China. No? So welcome to a wide discussion where the goal of Red ALC China, among others, is to allow for a respectful discussion and a learning process. No, we cannot discuss the same topics that we started 20 years ago. No, you know what? China is growing. Oh, really? Don't tell me. This is not sufficient in 2025, or you have to integrate to the already ongoing discussions in plenty of institutions, including Sechimex and Red ALC China. If you are interested on these topics, I very strongly recommend you to look into the web pages of both institutions. No, some references in 1 or 2 weeks, there will be a book coming out by Lin and Reiner regarding the topics or some of the topics I want to share with you. With the University of Pittsburgh, we have been also publishing in the last years in detail, and I leave it like that. Again, there are some references that might be useful for some of you. No? Some results before getting into specific topics in order to understand this new triangular relationship. In this more recent book that will come out very soon, I, among other things, highlight the importance of defining a group of concepts in order to understand China's socioeconomy, as you will see in a moment. Why is it important to have a group of concepts to understand China's socioeconomy and its relationship to Latin America and in the US? Because otherwise we end up, what I say a little bit with irony, we end up in a descriptive trap. No, you know what? China has been growing by 3.5% in the second quarter, and we expect that in the third quarter it will grow by 6.3%. And if you look into the webpage of, say, Chimex and Red ALC China, you will find gigas of information regarding trade, investments, and lots of other variables. No, and I could put you to sleep, all the persons that are participating. I could put you to sleep with lots of figures, charts, tables, etc. Descriptive, highly descriptive. No, so it is important to have a group of concepts, as I will try to share briefly in what we fall in the next minutes. No, some of the results of the research we have been doing in the last years. Of course, lots of empirical results, and in which the so-called think tanks in Washington, D.C., unfortunately have had a very limited role. No, I have participated in several of these institutions, the Atlantic Council, the Woodruff Wilson Center, the Brookings institutions, and plenty of others. And very surprisingly, the work they have been doing on the relationship between China and Latin America and the Caribbean has been, to put it politely, insufficient, which means that the audience in Washington, House of Representatives, Senates, the presidency, the ongoing discussions, academics and political discussions in Washington have been ill-informed. Some topics that I believe are relevant to understand this increasingly mature and complex relationship between Latin America and China. Topics that in both institutions, Sechimex and Red ALC China, we are pushing. No, ongoing research and work. The impact of China in Latin America's employment. Very impressive. You will find a group of working papers regarding this topic. So China, imagine, has generated in the last 25 years for this long period, 1995, 2021, more than 8 million jobs in Latin America as a result of employment generated by net trade. No? China has become the second trading partner of Latin America in the last 10 years, but also employment generated through OFDI, or outward foreign direct investment, and infrastructure projects. Imagine 8.1 million jobs based on input-output tables of the OECD, etc., account for around 15% of Latin America's formally employment generation for this long period. No? So almost 1 in 6 jobs in the last 20 years have been created by Chinese-related activities. This is impressive for everybody interested in economic, social topics and issues, etc. Look into the ongoing literature and research. Very little has been going on in the US, by the way, also in China and Latin America. Ongoing research in which the Red ILC China is pushing to deepen research on this issue. Second topic, and I will briefly relate to this issue, and this is much more a discussion in 2024, 2025. Welcome to debates, etc. So we have a very highly intensive discussion regarding tariffs, as you know. Mexico becoming apparently the backdoor of of Chinese imports to be exported to Mexico. However, surprisingly, again, think tanks in DC, they have presented very insufficient empirical work regarding this new triangular relationship. We are publishing, researching, working on this topic. I leave you simply with some initial results. So, the increasing presence of China in the US, by the way, and in Mexico is very clear. No? In the figure, you will see from a Mexican perspective how the US and China have a very important role in Mexico's exports to the United States. So, for this long period, 1995-2020, based again on input-output tables, the share in terms of value added of Mexican exports to the United States increases from 0% to 7.5% in 2025. What does this mean? It means that 7.5% of Mexican exports to the United States is Chinese value added. Mexico or China has become Mexico's second trading partner since 2003 for more than 20 years. So Mexico is exporting in a car, which says Hecho en Mexico, lots of parts and components, tires, windshields, harnesses, etc., imported from China and exported to the United States. The argument would be, for some people in Washington, I told you so, Mexico is the backdoor of Chinese imports. But who is importing in Mexico? 70% of Mexican imports are being pursued by foreign firms in Mexico, and mainly US firms. So General Motors, Ford, IBM, General Electrics, and thousands of many other firms are massively importing, established in Mexico, to export parts and components imported from China to the US. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm not saying bet China, bet General Motors, bet Mexico, but I'm simply highlighting this new triangular relationship, which has not been sufficiently understood, particularly by current policymakers in the United States. Welcome to a very complex industrial organization that has been evolving in the last 30 years in the 21st century. An additional topic that I would like to highlight that we are pushing, the importance of China in daily life in Latin America and also in Mexico, beyond economics. I would always highlight, imagine, let's do a video on one day without China in Latin America and in Mexico. Very difficult. No, we would have to walk barefoot without underwear. We wouldn't have this conference because most of the telecommunications is being done through antennas of Chinese firms. Ports, airports would not work, etc., etc. I'm not saying hurrah China, no, but I'm simply saying today in 2025, and there has been an ongoing process in the last 30 years, China's presence in Latin America is very important. So is the United States, by the way, no? But again, we have to simply recognize that getting rid of China in a weekend will not be possible. No? So the importance of China in daily life in Latin America regarding food, regarding culture, and regarding many other topics, I would invite you to take a look to this book. Finally, a topic that we believe is very important. Again, the relationship between Latin America and China is a two-way road. No, it's not only investments of China in Latin America. So we published at the end of 2023, I believe, an interesting book, 300 pages, 15 case studies of Latin American countries, the so-called multi-Latinas or trans-Latinas, regarding Latin American investments in China. Very interesting, no? Case studies of firms from Chile, Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, among others, investing for 20 plus years in China with different experiences, no? Topics that have not been even considered in most of the discussions. Apparently, for many researchers, in which the topic Latin America and China is fashionable, this is a one-way road. Correct. This is not correct. Again, if you participate, we will have at the end of May of this year the 7th International Seminar, 100 and plus conferences in 3 days by lots of experts working on different perspectives on Latin America and China. 3 or 4 concepts that I believe are fundamental for understanding this new triangular relationship. The first concept that I invite you to consider is the depth of the confrontation between the US and China, at least since 2013. Since 2013, President Xi Jinping in China has been discussing a group of global institutions, and I try to embed these institutions and different attempts under the heading of a globalization process with Chinese characteristics. We have a group of institutions, of regional institutions. In the case of Latin America, for example, the CELAC China Forum since 2014, but we can witness also other institutions for Africa, for Asian countries, etc., etc. with a group of concepts. The global community of shared future is important, but also a group of global initiatives in the last 3 or 4 years. And with a long-term cooperation proposal, at least until 2035, in some cases until 2050. This is fundamental or let's put it this way, since January 20th, 2025, and lots of executive orders generating massive global uncertainty. On the contrary, China is humbly saying, I offer you cooperation, certainty in the long run. This is not irrelevant for plenty of countries also in Latin America and the Caribbean. By the way, this globalization process is not only an economic process, but also from a cultural perspective. You have Confucius Institutes, more than 100 Confucius Institutes in Latin America, etc. Consider this globalization process that in a moment we will see. It clashes, of course, with the globalization process that we have been witnessing since or after World War II. A second concept that is fundamental, we are doing seminars on these topics, no? For a semester, so it will be difficult to discuss this in a few minutes. But I invite you to consider the concept of the public sector and the omnipresence of the public sector in China. And against a discussion on state-owned enterprises, of Chinese capitalism, communism, and lots of other discussions. The public sector is a very unique institution internationally. I don't know any other country in the world that has this public sector. What is the public sector in China? The public sector in China is the sum. We have to add the central government. Yes, the central government is important, but also provinces, cities, and municipalities with two important features. A, they compete violently with each other. And secondly, they have a coordinating mechanism, the Communist Party of China. This is a very interesting institution. Again, I'm not saying good or bad. I'm saying this is how China's socioeconomy works. Imagine this institution, this public sector, accounts for the property of around 45% of China's GDP. No? There is no other country in the world today of the top 10, 20 countries in which the public sector has the property over GDP of more than 5%. In the case of China, I highlight the omnipresence of the public sector in terms of its direct property. OEMs, car makers, auto parts, infrastructure, and in trade. In China's of the overseas foreign direct investment in Latin America, the public sector appears constantly. If we do not understand the complexity and uniqueness of this public sector, again with the factor of competition and another factor of long-term cooperation, we will not understand Chinese innovation, Chinese tourism, Confucius Institutes, cooperation among universities, and plenty of other topics. Look into the web pages of the institutions and my own web page, and you will find lots of empirical and conceptual discussions regarding this public sector, no, which is a fascinating institution, and I invite you to consider this sector much more seriously than saying, oh yes, they are state-owned enterprises. Worst case scenario, SASAC, one of the institutions in China, operates 119 state-owned enterprises. That is a caricature. It is insufficient if you compare these 119 firms and in comparison to this public sector, which is much more complex. No? Finally, or almost finally, the increasing importance of the concept of new triangular relationships. We have been working on these topics for more than a decade. No? If you look into the webpage of Socioeconomic, you will find a group of books regarding this concept in English. No? And it refers simply to the following situation. In the last 10 years, we are witnessing a profound competition between the US and China and a profound confrontation far beyond economics. No? The United States, I was a visiting professor at the University of Pittsburgh in 2020 and witnessed this process no? At the university. The United States has gotten rid of more than 100 Confucius institutes in the United States, no, under the pressure of the State Department highlighting we don't want Chinese spies in US universities. So the confrontation is not only regarding electric vehicles, high tech, and other fashionable topics, but it refers to tourism, no? Bilateral tourism, US tourism, and Chinese tourism, academic exchange, which has fallen dramatically, Confucius institutes, but also, of course, high-tech and many others. So what we are witnessing is a profound competition, systemic competition. The US and China have different economic and political systems, in the case of China, based on this public sector. And what we are witnessing is this confrontation between the two biggest economies of the world, and this will go on for decades in the future. And the question is, what will third countries or regions, Latin America, Mexico, but also Germany, Vietnam, and plenty of other countries. What will third countries do? Will they be able to be pragmatically regarding hundreds of topics regarding 5G, regarding a Chinese, or not, regarding infrastructure, regarding trains, regarding telecommunications, and hundreds of topics in which this new triangular relationship is fundamental? No, against the concepts, which I believe are not particularly intelligent, no, of the Cold War or the new Cold War. My 25-year-old daughter, no, she didn't witness this Cold War, so you Google Cold War, and it has something to do with the Soviet Union and the United States. The Soviet Union does not exist, but so the Soviet Union is like Russia, and they had problems with the US, and so China is like Russia. But this is not very intelligent. We are witnessing today qualitatively new relations among the two biggest economies of the world, and third countries and regions will have to engage in this relationship as we are witnessing it today. It's an invitation. If you look in some of the work of Socioeconomic and Red ALC China, you will find lots of analysis on the global value chain of auto parts and automobiles, new triangular relationships between the US, China, and Mexico, and other sectors and debates and discussions. This leads us, among other things, and from a Latin American perspective, that we have to distinguish between debates and discussions in the Latin America and Caribbean-China relationship. Unfortunately, if you look at the work of most of the so-called think tanks in Washington, they put all the topics of trade, financing, investments, all, they make a green juice, no? But unfortunately unable to make detailed contributions on the ongoing discussions between Latin America and China. So there is an ongoing specific discussion regarding trade between Latin America and China, but not only from an aggregated and general discussion and perspective, but for specific global value chains, for gigas of data regarding Paraguay, Argentina, Guatemala, Mexico, among others, no? And ongoing research on trade issues, no? We will publish in 2 months, I hope, a book regarding the local impact of Latin American exports to China. No? So it is not a matter of saying, yes, the impact of Brazil's export to China, but on soya beans. And so you have local impacts in Salvador Bahia, but also in La Pampa in Argentina, and on berries in Chile, and auto parts and automobiles in Mexico, local territorial impacts, the issue of trade. Second, China has become an enormous source of financing for Latin America. In the last years, this source has fallen, but in the last 10 years, it has been very dynamic. Third topic in the relationship is the increasing importance of Chinese investments in Latin America, particularly in countries such as Mexico. Finally, infrastructure projects, a topic that so far has not been discovered by the current political administration in the US, and neither by the so-called think tanks. But infrastructure projects are the most sophisticated bilateral in the most sophisticated instruments in the Latin America-China relationship with long-lasting impacts. If you use Chinese hydroelectric power plants or nuclear power plants, but also in the renovation of subway and metro stations in Mexico City, etc. This has long-lasting effects. They are growing very substantially. We have to distinguish, and if you get into the debates and discussions, you will find references regarding each of these topics against, again, a view of putting all these topics together, and at the end, you don't know what you are discussing. Finally, it is very fashionable in the last 2-3 years to discuss a nearshoring process. No, note the irony. No, usually nearshoring is understood as a relocation of processes of plants for different reasons. No, by the way, you will find apparent synonyms of onshoring, nearshoring, ally-shoring, offshoring, friendshoring, etc. They all apparently refer to this relocation process. I humbly believe this discussion is not very useful. No, I invite, since we are in this fashion of the shorings, no, I invite very clearly and strongly to understand the concept of security shoring. No? Since 2022, 2023, particularly the US has been highlighting, note under the Biden administration with Janet Yellen, Jake Sullivan, the White House, and very strongly since January 20th, that the United States will highlight its own national security as the most important topic vis-à-vis China. I quote here a very recent document from a few days ago from the White House highlighting economic security is national security. No, so issues that we were historically accustomed to understand regarding free trade, innovation, technology, but also cultural and tourism and many other issues, they will all fall under the concept of national security, vis-a-vis mainly China, but welcome to new triangular relationships, increasingly with the pressure, not to say blackmailing third countries such as Mexico, and saying, Mexico, are you going to participate in my security shoring process against China? And you might benefit, or not, and accept the consequences. No, again, welcome to an ongoing discussion regarding these concepts. And finally, I would tell you, well, since January 20th, no? Well, what we are witnessing, we could do a conference on this, but I would simply highlight that what we are witnessing is that the founder of the Bretton Woods institutions after World War II and since 1944, the founder, the United States, is profoundly questioning its own rules and the world order as we have known it. No, the issue of reciprocity has been cancelled. No, and so explicitly the White House and President Trump has highlighted, I will not continue with the reciprocity of the Bretton Woods institutions, and we are living under daily new executive orders that are generating massive uncertainty. By the way, mainly, or not mainly, but not only, but also by US firms established in, for example, Mexico, no? Which have been exporting for more than 5 decades from Mexico to the United States, and they don't know if next week Mexico will pay 25%, 15% on their cars they are exporting to the US. No, as you might imagine, this is important for doing business for these firms in Mexico, and this is going on in plenty of other countries. No, so welcome to a long run uncertainty in which I could imagine that China, surprise, will massively benefit from this massive uncertainty. Again, Chinese process of globalization in which China is offering long-term cooperation projects. Today in Mexico, we don't know what will happen next week. No? China is, note the irony, saying, my friend, I can offer you a long-term relationship in terms of trade, investment, but also culture, tourism, etc. I don't have sufficient time. I have already taken my time regarding what we agreed on, but I would highlight that with this group of concepts, we've been working on institutional issues between Latin America and China, in which always the US plays an important role, trade, financing of the infrastructure, among others. No? So I had here a group of slides regarding the specific topic of Chinese investments in Mexico, which are part of an ongoing discussion and will continue to do so in the next years, very probably. And I will simply go back, I will send you the full presentation, and I will simply highlight some conclusions. No? So again, very unfortunately, I would highlight academics, but also policymakers in the US have not been aware of the increasing presence of China in Latin America, no, the backyard or backdoor of the US. This process has been going on for 30 years, very specifically in Mexico regarding trade, investment, financing, and infrastructure projects. And suddenly, since 2024, the topic has come up. This is a very insufficient perspective regarding China's presence. No, surprisingly, we have pretty weak institutions also in Latin America and China, by the way, not to say in the US, to understand this increasing presence in different fields of the Latin America-China relationship. Concepts are fundamental to understand China and the LAC-China relationship. Otherwise, we fall in gigas and gigas of charts, tables, and whatever. No, today, under this process of security shoring and massive executive orders, in which also the president loses the view of if tariffs on Mexico will be implemented next week or in April, etc. This is generating a short-term massive uncertainty also for US firms established in Latin America and in Mexico. No? Well, these are some additional issues that I will leave aside based on Chinese investments in Mexico, which have been increasing importantly. Well, look at some of the work we have been doing. We recently published a document regarding aspects for a strategic agenda between Mexico and China. The subtitle is New Triangular Relationships, which means Mexico needs a strategic agenda with the United States, of course, but also with China. It is not a discussion of United States or China. 35 pages, 27 proposals with a group of colleagues. Some of these issues might be of interest for some of you. No? And with this, I finish my presentation. No?